Part 2. Chapter 10. Black and Jewish. As I know that many people will wonder about me, I thought it best to say something about myself, which shall be the truth, before anyone begins speculating. Well now, where does my story begin? I believe that, to answer that question, I should take the reader as far back as 2,000 years ago. We shall go back to Israel, to the time of the destruction of the temple by the Romans. My ancestor was an Essene who, like a great deal of them, had openly become a follower of Rabbi Yeshua bar Joseph of Nazareth while remaining a fully practicing Essene. He was 30 years old at the time of the destruction of the temple, and he and his fellow Essenes regularly gave shelter to some of Rabbi Yeshua's chosen apostles and leading disciples in his community. My ancestor's name was Yehuda Jared ben Pinchas the Levite. And his father was Pinchas ben Shimon the Levite, an Essene who also became one of the Essene disciples who followed Rabbi Yeshua everywhere he went. Before that, he was one of those who represented the Essene sect in the temple. He had the duty to make a record of all the major events, and most times everything that took place in the temple, for his superiors. He was a scholar who could speak Greek and Latin, as well as the secular Hebrew and the more vernacular Aramaic language. He also translated documents for his superiors. As Yeshua's career progressed when he began to take disciples, Pinchas was ordered to follow Yeshua and record everything that took place around him. Much later, 2 years before the destruction of the temple, all the Essenes who had been quite numerous but lived in 3 main separate groups, gathered together, their prophets having foreseen a lot of the future events. With them was John, the son of Zebedee, a relative and an apostle of Yeshua, who was now a very old man. Their meeting was to decide about their future and a way to ensure the survival of their faith. It was the end of their world, as they saw it. As they knew that many of their people were being killed, they officially annulled the strict vow of celibacy that some of them had taken in order to become Essenes clerics, and they decided that they should separate and go, if possible, to foreign countries and marry the native women of the chosen countries, in order to ensure the survival of the children of Abraham. Many decided to go to Tibet, some to Persia and India, others to Egypt and to other North African countries. Others headed toward the European countries. A lot more chose to go to Ethiopia, and the rest chose to remain in Palestine and fight the Romans. These ones went and joined the troops of the resistance army of the Zealots. My ancestor Yehuda, Pinchas' son, was among those who went to Ethiopia. He was 30 years old. For a while he lived with the Falashas, another community of black Jews, who lived on an island in an Ethiopian lake. There he befriended a young Hebrew man who was an ambulant merchant. He regularly traveled south by boat to African coastal cities, selling fabrics to rich indigenous inhabitants, kings and dignitaries. This young man was from a wealthy Hebrew family, long established in Ethiopia, whose members had always been in the same line of business as himself, textiles. My ancestor's friend got him interested in his traveling salesman's business, and they began to regularly sail together. That is how they arrived one day at the coasts of the African country now known as Cameroon. It used to be their last stop before they returned to Ethiopia, and they usually remained there up to a full month before they set sail again. My ancestor's friend, who already had a girl there with whom he had 2 sons, introduced him to a pretty girl, with whom he fell in love. For 3 years he came and went, still seeing the same girl. Finally, he and his friend decided to establish themselves there and marry their girls, as the Romans had begun to arrive in the north of Africa, pursuing and persecuting any Hebrews who attempted to adhere to their Jewish faith. My ancestor Yehuda and his friend thus married their girlfriends, and brought their children up together, setting up their own community, and following the patriarchal tradition in the way it was set up. My ancestor being the eldest of the 2, it was decided that he should be the chief and the priest. He thus undertook the children's religious education, and ruled lovingly over them all, while his friend took care of other mundane problems like the finances, lodging, subsistence, security and the supervision of community activities. At that time, vast areas of land belonged to no one, and of course the country was not yet called Cameroon. Thus they were able to clear and appropriate large tracts of land. The distribution of land for the building of houses was also the duty of my ancestor. Also, they each married 3 wives. Thus within 2 decades they had formed a small, young and thriving Jewish community. They encouraged their sons to marry very young, at about 13 or 14 years of age, and my ancestor having been an Essene, this was therefore religiously speaking an Essene community, but right from the start, theirs was a bilingual community, all speaking Aramaic and their wives' indigenous mother tongue. They tended to live apart and had quite a different lifestyle from the rest of the people there. They had their own customs and traditions that they had to practice, and some of them were very demanding, and when their daughters married, they insisted that their husbands came and lived in their community and converted to their faith. This rather displeased the parents of the young men, and what with jealousies arising from seeing this new community prospering so well, enmities soon developed. The community, because of these hostilities, moved further on inland, setting up a village close to one of the main Cameroonian rivers, the Sanaga, and settling there. For a long time they lived there, and slowly their Aramaic was abandoned, for the local language, which was also different from the first coastal language they had also been using. There, they lived in peace till the end of the 19th century, but their spoken Sanaga was spiced with deformed Aramaic words. The autochthonies of the Sanaga region had given my people the name of the Ngolki, and we are still known by that name now. My ancestor Yehuda ben Pinchas having been a rather short man, most of us have inherited that trait. They again had to leave that village early in the 20th century, the colonists having by then occupied and being in control of most of Cameroon, and the Christian missionaries had also arrived, and were forcefully converting all the people with the help of the authorities. When these authorities discovered that my people were a Jewish community, and that they refused to assimilate to this new state religion, they singled them out, and they began persecuting them. Cameroonians are sedentary people, but our community was forced to become a small wandering tribe, hated, despised, victimized and chased away from everywhere they tried to settle and put down roots, and as they moved, our community was separated into 2 main groups. One group was made up of a few families not related to us. Our group was the chief family, which was made up totally of families of blood relatives up to 4 or 5 times removed. Of the group that separated from us, part of them unfortunately became totally assimilated into Christianity, and we lost touch immediately. The rest set up home 2 kilometers from a village that is situated about 6 kilometers from the village where my family lives now. That new settlement was immediately requisitioned by the Cameroonian authorities on the advice of Christian religious readers. It was then turned into a leper colony and many leprous people were moved into it. But one family to which we are distantly related luckily left that settlement and went to live elsewhere, about 40 kilometers in another county from us. But they have kept in touch with us up to this day. They are also called Ngolkis by the autochthonies of the area where they live. Although they are all Roman Catholics now, we are still very much in touch, since they too are descendants of Yehuda the Levite. The other people who had remained at that settlement were all contaminated and died as lepers. That leaves my family properly speaking, and a cousin family with which we live together in the same village, only in 2 main different groups. All of them too are descendants of the original family founded by my ancestor Yehuda. We moved quite a few times in the early years of the 20th century, before my great-grandfather and the son of one of his cousins, twice removed, came back to settle where my family still lives now. There in the south of Cameroon, they put roots in a small village called Olamdo. In it I was born in the late 1950s. We are still called the Ngolkis by the people of that village. We are still despised and hated. We are still insulted and we are still provoked. Didn't the Jews murder Jesus? Ngolkis, what does that mean anyway? Who are you people anyway, and where did you even come from? They regularly asked when I was little. I still remember. All members of my family are black-skinned like the rest of the villagers. We speak the same language as them, but they call us foreigners all the same. They still say that we do not belong in their midst. That is probably due to a fair-skin trait that we have in our genes. They flare up from time to time in all generations, where children will be born totally devoid of the black pigment. Still my family is very large, because it comprises not only those descended from my own grandfather, but those from his brothers, sisters and direct cousins. A very, very large family. But of course things have changed now. The girls from the family who now marry outside of the community can freely choose to go and live with their husbands. Religious tuition was available to both girls and boys equally. Right from the start, when my ancestor set up our community, there was no sign of the Pharisaic chauvinistic attitude that has survived till now in Orthodox Jewish communities. Before my great-grandfather, David Mitogo, died, my grandfather, who was called Solomon Ondwa Mitogo, married my grandmother Marguerite, the daughter of a Christian Presbyterian deacon. She gave birth to 2 daughters and a son. The firstborn child was a daughter, my mother Rachel. The second was Naomi, my aunt. Finally, there came my uncle David. Such is the story of how we, a clan of black Jews, happened to be in Cameroon, instead of anywhere else, as we have always known in our family, as my grandfather Solomon told me, slightly before he passed away. As an Essene, I accept the true teachings of Rabbi Yeshua as he taught his followers, and my ancestor Pinchas the Levite, not the Christian version. We call my ancestors simply Pinchas Olevi and Yehuda Olevi. Like my ancestors and Rabbi Yeshua's original followers, I believe in his teachings. As I also believe in the teachings of Moses and those of the prophets and other eminent rabbis of blessed memories. But I do not, as such, worship Rabbi Yeshua as a god. I am still waiting for the promised Messiah, just like Rabbi Yeshua himself did, and like he taught his followers to wait. I am a Jewish Essene, like Rabbi Yeshua was. I am not a Christian. My grandparents brought me up with my elder sister Marie-Thérèse, whom we affectionately called Fillette. My uncle David was at college, and my sister preferred to go and stay with my mother at every opportunity. I was the only one left to sit and listen to my grandfather, asking him deep questions and willing to learn when he offered to train and teach me. Normally, in the patriarchal way, the teachings are passed from father to son, but it was different with us. Even though as Jews we were Orthodox, but as we were also Essenes, there was luckily no discrimination towards women. Both boys and girls got the religious teachings if they were interested. Those who showed outstanding abilities were the ones who were chosen to get the Kabbalah, the secret esoteric Jewish teachings. As my grandfather was getting on in years, he had to choose someone to receive the secret teachings. So he chose me. Concerning my childhood. When thinking about my childhood, it had not been a very normal one as such. If anyone paid attention to what I said on previous pages, they would have noticed that I am the second of my mother's 10 children, and the odd one out of the lot, because all the other children have the same father while I have a different one. My mother was a boarding school student when she got pregnant for the first time by a young man, who was then also a student, and who later became her husband and the father of all her other children, myself excepted. He was called Samuel Assem. According to regulations, she had to leave school then, to go and give birth to my elder sister Marie-Thérèse. Her sweetheart's parents by then had already arranged a marriage between him and another girl that was a student nurse. When this girl's parents learnt that my mother was pregnant with Samuel's child, they insisted that his wedding with their daughter be celebrated immediately, and it was done. So my mother went back home to my grandparents to bring her pregnancy to term, and right before my sister was born, my grandfather, who disapproved of polygamy, arranged a marriage for my mother and a man who was a schoolteacher. In so doing, he hoped to keep her away from Samuel. That marriage was celebrated and my elder sister was officially registered as the schoolteacher's daughter, but my mother was not in love with this other man. So she left him, and soon after, that marriage was annulled. 3 years later I was born in our ancestral home after my mother had a brief relationship with my natural father, who was called Gaston Manny. My sister Marie-Thérèse Fillette and I were thus brought up in the ancestral home. As soon as Samuel learnt that my mother's marriage had been annulled, he came back to her and asked her to marry him. Of course, she said yes. She thus left the community to live with her husband. I was just 2 years old when she left. So, even though my grandparents brought me up and I considered my grandmother to be my recognized mother, I always knew who had given birth to me. How greedy. My memories go back as early as when I was 1 year old, and the very first weird thing that happened to me was when I was 3 years old. There was a very tall, fair-skinned man who used to visit our home regularly. His name, when translated, meant viper, but I think that name was a nickname. He was so totally devoid of the black gene that he was virtually white. Many such children are born from time to time among our relatives. Viper's mother, whose skin was also white, was an Ngolki. I did get to meet his daughters later, and they too were just as white as himself, and my grandfather told me once, when I had questioned him, that we were related, and that Viper was his cousin. Well, whenever he came, this Viper got the best of everything. He got the best and most of the food on the dining table, and there was lots of it, as he had the appetite of a giant. He was given the best guest room, even if it was already occupied, it had to be vacated for him, since he insisted on being given that one and no other. Everyone, including my sister and I, respected and pandered to all his whims. I hated it when we had visitors, for according to our custom, the guest is king and has to come first. This meant that my grandmother had to make sure that the guests were well fed before I was given my meals. People always got served according to their age, the oldest first, and when there was a guest, he got served before everyone else. This time when this Viper came, my grandmother had the biggest of our chickens cooked. Chicken was what I most wanted to eat, despite the other foodstuffs that were served. But after Viper and all the other adults had been served, all I was given of the much-wanted chicken was 2 wing ends, a bony neck, too much sauce with plenty of rice, and not much else. As I had wanted nothing else but chicken, it was not long before I finished my meal, and I was still very hungry. So I threw caution to the winds, and unnoticed by the adults, I went and sat close to the man, and angrily and desperately watched huge pieces of our chicken disappear into his mouth and down his throat. I disapprovingly stared at him in silence, hoping that he would become embarrassed and give some to me. Instead, he said impatiently, "What an ill-bred child. Why is she staring at me like that? How greedy." Everyone's head turned angrily towards me. I had broken one of the sacred rules that were given to us, never to stare at guests while they ate, or ask them for whatever they were eating or drinking. My grandfather grabbed me by the arms and smacked me twice on the bottom, saying, "You never listen, do you?" It was about 7 o'clock in the evening and it was deep dark outside, but I ran out screaming and lay on an antelope skin that we had. While I cried, I looked up, and high up in the sky was a large bright thing like a round house. It was just hanging there with all its windows alight, and with flashing red and blue lights on the bottom and the top of it. I stared at it, and marveled. I soon calmed down and slowly became aware that it was someone or something that had calmed me down, but there was no one there. I never quite understood how that could have happened, neither did it bother me at the time. I simply went back indoors, all my sadness gone. As I said, I was just 3 years old then. The following morning I picked up a box of matches and looked at it, and I began reading the letters on it. I still had not gone to school, and no one had taught me to read. The letters were spelling a word that I did not understand. So I went and asked my Aunt Naomi to read the words. She read thus, "Tay palm tray." Then she said, "As a matter of fact it is English, so I do not know the proper pronunciation, but judging by the picture and the first syllable of the word, I assume it means le palmier, the palm tree." I already knew this, because she had read the words the same way I had read them in French. I did not know then how I knew how to read. I simply knew the written words. I did not tell my aunt that I had read the word, because I probably thought that it was normal for me to be able to read. When I think about it now, I could read long before I was 2. I must have been 1 year old, but I did not talk, not that I could not, I was simply a silent child. From then on, I regularly began to take my grandmother's Bible and read it. People who saw me probably thought that I was just a child staring at the pages of books pretending to read them. And as I was a quiet child, I never read aloud. Thus at 3, I began to read by myself those fascinating stories of our ancestors that my grandfather taught us, all the children of the community and myself every evening. In fact, I became addicted to reading, if I may even say so, and I still am. Till now there is no day that has gone by without me reading something. Then starting from when I was 5 years old, I could tune into people's brains and know exactly what they were thinking about. That was one of the special practical things my grandfather used to teach me when we were alone. I also could easily guess where certain missing things could be found. The same way I knew sometimes where things belonging to other people were, if asked. I could not understand why my playmates could not guess where their things were when they mislaid them, because that was very easy to me. I just seemed to be attracted by what I was looking for, so that I headed towards the objects without any hesitation. Unfortunately, I always ended up being accused of taking and hiding those. When I began to frequent a school that was about 3 miles from our village, I was constantly hungry during the day, as I could not go home during the short breaks for food. There were no such things as school dinners for us. I went to school in the morning and came back home in the evenings. So I used to call my friends, telling them that we should go up and down the road, to pick up coins that I knew were lying in the grass, with which we bought cakes to eat. When my friends asked me how I knew that the money was where we found it, I used to look at them impatiently, thinking they were stupid, since every child knew things like that. In their turn they called me a witch. I was not at all pampered in my opinion, though compared to all the other children in our village, I was very spoilt by my family. But my grandfather insisted that I should go through all that the other children went through, that I might be prepared for the life I was going to live in the future, outside of our community. Unfortunately, as well as being so weird, I was also very sickly. Anything that I caught got me bedridden and near to death. From common colds, headaches and stomach aches to insect bites. Some of these conditions are nothing to African children, who quickly develop immunity to them from the first months after they are born. But to me they were deadly. I can still remember my grandmother and grandfather rushing me to the hospital in the middle of the night, half dead after just 2 days suffering from common cold. Africa is very hot, but I felt cold most of the time, especially in the mornings. It was only during the dry season that I felt the heat properly, like all other Africans. I grew up a very taciturn, quiet, and very thoughtful child for many reasons. One of them was that though my mother had 10 children, I lived with my grandmother and grew up as an only child, because I never went to visit my mother and siblings often. But my grandmother loved me very much, spoilt me and kept me clean. Cameroonians care for their children in a way that I have not seen elsewhere. For they show so much concern and care that cuddles do not seem so important for a child to know that it is loved. I particularly never felt that need, neither did I think that such a thing could actually amount to anything particularly serious. On the contrary, I was taught to be very defensive of my body and not to allow just anybody to touch me. Of course I got cuddles when they were necessary. Like if I got hurt while playing, if I was crying, and when I was ill or disappointed about something. Also I was taught to be dignified and reserved, and not to show my feelings easily. And right from the start I learnt to be very stoic, and grew up to always be very calm and collected, and to keep my emotions in perfect check. My grandmother was absolutely fantastic. She carried me everywhere when we were traveling. And if she went somewhere, there was never a time when she came back without a present for me. I was just another late baby for her instead a grandchild. She was the one who made sure that I knew all about the Christian version of Rabbi Yeshua's life. My Aunt Naomi monitored my academic education at home, checking my spelling, my reading and my writing, and making sure that she knew exactly what I was being taught at school. Not knowing just how well I could read, she never asked me to read anything above my supposedly normal level. She contented herself to congratulate me after each reading session. At the age of 5, while playing around one of my grandmother's storage rooms, I came across an old suitcase in which she kept my Uncle David's old exercise books. I also discovered then that she was also collecting mine. In the same suitcase, I found a Petit Larousse encyclopedia. From it, I taught myself vocabulary and exact grammatical laws to go with written French, without forgetting all the big words found in all dictionaries. Then at age 7 I had a teacher who was to destroy my world, because I used to raise my hand to answer questions before he even finished asking them. The man was a brute who used to beat up the pupils out of pleasure, and his name was Eli Mamaya. He had a collection of canes, each one with its own affectionate little name. He asked and asked questions, hoping that the children would get them wrong, so he would have a reason to use the canes on them. I felt bored and wondered why the teacher took a whole year trying to teach me to read and spell words that I already knew. But after having beaten up every child in the classroom except me, he began asking me to read texts well above my class level, which I did. One day this went on for 20 minutes. Finally, the man, with an evil and distorted face, came toward me and said, "I have never seen a child like you that can read like that at your age. You cannot read." He shouted angrily, his malevolent eyes virtually coming out of their orbits. But I answered, "I can, you know I can read, and you know that everything you have just given me to read has been well read. I have been reading for a long time. That was a grave mistake on my part." He glowered and barked, "I say you cannot. What do you think you are? Do you think you are more intelligent than I am?" Then he made me lie on the ground and caned me before the whole class until I bled. Then he warned me not to tell my family that he had beaten me like that. Finally he warned me that if I dared to show that I was intelligent again, he would beat me even more. He asked me if my family knew that I could read like that. When I said no, he said, "Good, starting from now you shall learn with all the children of your age, no more of that intelligence nonsense." I felt such pain that I could not sit properly for days. I made sure that neither my grandmother nor my aunt saw the traces of the beatings, as by then I was already used to washing and bathing myself, and I always insisted that I were alone when I bathed. I had learnt my lesson. I never again showed any signs of being bright. I no longer raised my hand to answer questions in class, and what I knew I kept to myself. And I deliberately introduced mistakes in all the homeworks that Elimamaya gave us to do. He then used to take great pleasure in raising my paper up, shouting triumphantly, "Oh, now see what our genius had written. Did you unscrew your head off when you wrote this? Where is our clever brain now?" That beating affected me so much that I became very secretive. So secretive that if I was asked a personal question, anything concerning me personally, I preferred to invent an alternative answer, rather than tell the truth. Unless it was something banal or unless the person that asked the question was someone I knew well, and whom I could trust implicitly, and there were not many of those. No one had to know anything anymore, nobody needed to know anything about me. Yes, only in Africa could child geniuses be beaten and bullied back to stupidity. Anyway, at that time nothing such as child geniuses were recognized in the Cameroonian and African society at large. Any child showing signs of precocious intelligence was accused of being evil, or a witch, or any other such scary things. For the sake of a quiet life, geniuses had to pretend to be half-wits. My dear grandfather, my teacher. But my beloved grandfather was the one who truly shaped and trained me spiritually. He never treated me as a child as far as religious education was concerned. He reckoned that every child was ready to be taught the law as soon as they could speak. He used to say, as soon as a child is conceived, the fetus spends the first 4 months of its life in the womb being taught the law of God, blessed is he by its guardian angel. So when the child is born, it is never too early to begin teaching it. For the teaching is only to remind it of what it had already learnt. He was a good philosopher, very fond of the biblical proverbs and of the Canticles of Solomon, which he knew by heart and often quoted. Though he was as dark-skinned as me, his features were those of a noble Hebrew. I used to sit at his feet, staring at him in adoration and wondering how a dark old African man could look so much like a real Jew. He never missed an opportunity to teach me. If we sat beside a fire, he would give me a long lecture concerning fire. He explained the uses of fire, its properties and its spiritual importance, and about fire according to the law of the angels and the spirits. If it were nighttime, he would take me outside and point at the moon and the stars. He would point out the many constellations, calling them by their names, which sometimes were different from the names known in the astronomical field. He taught me about the mysterious Elionen, the children of light as he also called them. Genial beings who came from distant planets and galaxies, and who used science to create human beings on Earth. He used to tell me, "You are different and very special, the rare gem that I never believed would ever be born in our family during my lifetime. One day, you shall see them, Elianan. Just like I have often seen them. You have many gifts, and one day, you shall use those gifts, when time eventually comes. If we went to the farm, which he often insisted that we did, he pointed at plants, told me all their names in our mother tongue and instructed me on their medicinal properties and how to use those. He taught me to meditate and visualize, and to make things happen using the power of my mind. I loved to do those exercises very much. And some of these deep teachings, my grandfather told me to keep to myself, and never to reveal them to the unworthy. I was a very eager disciple and kept the teachings a secret. He had a gift for whistling. He could just about whistle any tune, be it African or European, classical or modern. He also whistled unknown tunes that I could only guess were his own compositions. Those were the magical ones, in which his genius could be felt and experienced. I used to cry every time I heard him whistle. His music touched something in me, that I, and everyone who heard him, felt that we were hearing the voice of God. The things he did with his tongue had to be heard and to be experienced, to be believed. He sounded as if 3 different people were whistling at the same time. That is only how I can attempt to explain it. His fame lasts to this day in our part of Cameroon. Had he been born in a developed country, he would have become a superstar, a musical genius. Well, after being beaten up by Eli Mamaya, I decided one day to use my grandfather's teachings. I went home, lit a candle and began using the power of my mind, wishing the man to be transferred away from our school every day from then on. So strongly did I do this that I was relieved when at the end of the school year they announced that he would no longer be teaching at our school. He was with us only 1 year, and such a thing never happened. Usually, teachers stayed some 5 or 10 years before being transferred elsewhere. But I was very happy and so were all my classmates, I will always remember. We were all dancing and hugging each other at the news. There was this silly situation in our village, where people who were not Ngolkis teased me over the man who was my natural father, the man called Gaston Mani. They would call my name and add Gaston to it and giggle. Herr Désiré Gaston. Why this amused them exactly, and why they felt the need to tease me over it, I never knew for a long time. But this upset me, not because of the mention of my father's name, but because I found the whole subject stupid, boring and a total waste of time. Those people were being childish in my opinion, and I wished they had better things to do to occupy their time, instead of making those silly jokes. Sometimes they would imitate someone crying, saying, "Didn't I name Désiré after you?" One day, a village woman said that to me one time too many, so I grabbed her by the arm and screamed. "Why do you keep saying that to me? What does that mean? Who said that?" She laughed and said, "Haven't you guessed already? It was your mother who said that." She had cried like that when Gaston Mani nearly died. "Oh, by the way, his full name is Gaston Désiré Mani." Then she walked away laughing, anything to annoy a little girl. But yes, somehow I had suspected that those words had been my mother's. Also at 7, my grandmother decided to have me baptized at the Presbyterian church she attended without fail every Sunday. This was because of the funny situation that existed between my grandmother and grandfather. Despite the unique lifestyle that we lived in our village, she insisted on sitting us up to expound the Christian doctrine to us. She argued that nobody knew where fate would lead us after death. If we could not have eternal life as Jews, then we would not fail to have it as Christians. She only wanted to make sure that all the family should be together when Messiah comes. So she insisted on having me baptized. Sometimes even prayers became a big issue. When we went to the farm with my grandfather, she sometimes asked him to say a Christian blessing, which means he had to pray mentioning Rabbi Yeshua. This annoyed him a lot because he usually only ever prayed to the Hebrew God, always commencing with, "O Jehovah our God, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob." But he obliged just to please her. At those moments he always said his blessing beginning thus, "Rabbi Jesus, why argue between Jews? Or Rabbi, what is faith between 2 Jews? Did you not use to say yourself, blessed are thou, Jehovah our God, King of the universe?" Thus he said the proper blessing and mentioned Rabbi Yeshua at the same time. It is needless to say that this always infuriated my grandmother. She'd say, "That wasn't a prayer, it was a man-to-man conversation." "Exactly," would retort my grandfather. There has never been a question of me not believing in God or doubting that there was one. For apart from practicing Judaism, I also grew up going to church on Sundays with my grandmother. Besides, the Christians at my grandmother's church, themselves were very pious, God-loving people. At home we had prayer meetings early every morning during which my grandmother taught us the meaning of the scriptures according to the Christian faith. As I was always with her, I watched and copied everything she did, and prayer was a natural, if not obsessive thing with her. She prayed every morning when she woke up, before she ate and before she went to sleep. She prayed before we began work every day at the farm during the school holidays, and before we returned home in the evening. She prayed when she or anyone else set off on a trip. And I did the same. My grandfather never wanted to go to church, but he let me go with my grandmother. However, she eventually persuaded him to go and get baptized at her church before he died. I guess he only agreed for the sake of peace, because he knew that she would never stop asking until she got her way. I loved going to church to sing the lovely songs they used to sing, and also going to children's Sunday school, where we staged plays based on the scriptures and learnt psalms. But the most memorable moments for me were those I spent in private tuition with my grandfather. It was also when I was 7 years old that he truly began to teach me about fasting, making vows and going into retreats for communion with my holy guardian angel, as well as the angelic communions in general, in the Essene way. I was 8 when I terminated the reading of the whole Bible from beginning to end for the second time, and when I also read my first spy novel. It was fabulous. I followed it up with detective novels and photo novels. Also in my childhood, I lived a rather spiritually enchanted life, being protected from above. There seemed to be an invisible guardian angel who followed me everywhere, making sure that I was safe and pulling me out of difficult situations. I remember as a 9-year-old girl late one evening, I was playing hide and seek with the children who lived across the road from our ancestral home. They were not Ngolkis, but their family was friends of ours and I had been named after Ntolo, a woman of their family. Anyway, we were playing outside and there was this coverless trunk that was leaning against a wall. As I complained that I had nowhere to hide, 2 boys asked me to lie down so that they could turn the heavy trunk over me. They assured me that it would be an ideal place to hide, and stupidly, I agreed and they covered me. But once under it, I realized that the trunk was not as large as I had thought, and I had to roll up in a fetal position to fit under it. As there were no holes on the trunk, I soon began lacking air. I tried to push it off, but could not budge it, as it was very heavy. I knocked on its sides to attract attention but nobody came. Finally I gave up and was beginning to lose consciousness, when the trunk suddenly came off me as if pulled by a giant. I lay there in the same position for a few seconds, breathing in large lungfuls of air. The trunk was leant against the wall, further away from me, but there was nobody around. To this day, I do not know who had pulled that trunk off from over me, because when it came off, I had my eyes wide open. Then I realized that my playmates were no longer around and had stopped playing. Their mother had called them in for dinner and they had simply forgotten about me. I would have died, had a miraculous hand not saved me. But I remember noticing something when the trunk had so miraculously been pulled off me. That evening, I saw a sight that was rare in my village. On the deserted road stood a very tall white man dressed in white shining clothes, and there was a belt with flashing lights in its middle around his waist. Astonished, I turned away to look at the trunk for a second, and when I turned back the tall white man was gone. But high above in the sky was the same luminous and rounded object with flashing lights that I had seen when I was 3 years old, on that evening when I had stared at Viper eating chicken. It hung there for a while before turning on its side and shooting right up into the sky and disappearing behind the clouds. There were countless incidents like that one, when I could not explain how I had miraculously been pulled out of danger and saved.